Welcome back to Razor's Edge. I am your host, Ben Elowitz. Today, I am sitting down with Kevin Bennett. Kevin is a mission-driven founder, and he has raised over $200 million. He is the founder and CEO of Further, which is an AI company that is on a mission to make home ownership more achievable for the next generation of Americans. And Kevin is a multi-time entrepreneur. After his first company, HomeZen, he founded Caribou. Caribou is an online auto refinance business. It is not a venture sweet spot, and VCs, when he would pitch, initially looked at him sideways. Yet he built that company into a unicorn, raising round after round, all in a category nobody was writing blog posts about it. Kevin's success was not because of a Silicon Valley perfect pitch. Instead, it was about what he calls a trust dividend. Instead of bravado, he brought radical honesty and vulnerability and trust that he built in little moves over time, all of which added up and got investors to take the big leap of funding his company, even though it wasn't in a hot space. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with him as much as I did. Kevin, I'm so appreciative and excited to get to talk with you today. I thought we'd just dig in right in to the deep end with a lightning round to get to know you and kind of get our conversation started about what makes a top fundraiser. If you had to describe your leadership style in one word, what would it be?
One word that is tough. And the phrase is mission-driven, value-led, but I'd say mission or values, and those are distinct and really competing. But I think it's important to have clarity of mission you care deeply about. And I think being values-led as a way to animate that mission is really critical.
Awesome. If you have a favorite book or podcast that you recommend, what would that be?
And there's so many. Honestly, I've enjoyed listening to a few episodes of Razor's Edge recently. It's been really great. I often listen to all the standards in tech and certainly focused on AI. 20 VCs Roundup episode is really great. But I also love Hidden Brain, behavioral science podcast. I think there's so much great content out there.
Let's talk fundraising. Is fundraising a relationship or a transaction?
Well, the annoying answer is both, but I think the relationship is primary to the transaction. There obviously is a transaction involved, but it starts before the transaction and goes way beyond the transaction in the relationship. So the relationship's the enduring component for sure.
Got it. Along those lines, what do you think is most important for a founder in a fundraise? Is it EQ or IQ or hustle?
I think what founders need is two things. One is self-centered and the other is other-centered. I got early advice from a friend who's a multi-time serial founder and serial entrepreneur. The best thing you can do is be you. Don't try to be someone else's persona of a founder or CEO. You've got to be yourself and the best version of that. And then on the other side, it's to really try to put yourself in the other person's shoes and understand what they care about and really make sure you're speaking to their needs and what their interests are. And I think that's also critical. And those are the two, I'd say, drivers of success.
I can't wait to get into both of those. I have a feeling we're going to talk about them. What is a piece of conventional fundraising advice that you think is dead wrong?
You alluded to this earlier. There's barbell approaches. There's the kind of jam it through as fast as possible and move on. And there's the relationship side. Trying to jam it through as fast as possible is, I think, risky to wrong on two fronts. One is you might fail, right? It's a very high risk way to try and raise capital. Also, it's a shotgun marriage. You've just done a really fast speed dating round of someone that you're going to spend, if you're successful, 10 or 20 years with. And I'm not sure that's something that folks should aspire to sign up to.
Yeah. So on a related note, do you think you can manufacture FOMO?
You can. I think you absolutely can. You can create leverage in the process. There are all kinds of tactical things you can do. And there are moments when those are appropriate, obviously, to keep processes moving. But those should be tactics and not the goals or strategy. And the goal is really to find the right partner and get to the right outcome with the right partner.
Yep. What's your biggest green flag in an investor? Something that makes you say, okay, this is somebody that is serious, wants to work with me, and I want to work with.
So the concept that I think distills this is really this idea of a trust dividend. And one of the core elements of a trust dividend or how you build trust is How quickly does someone do something that is not in their immediate best interest to help you? It doesn't have to be counter their interest, but just do something or go out of their way to actually be helpful. And I think that starts to build confidence. This person might not be, to your point, seeing the entire world through a transactional lens, but through more of a relationship building lens. And that's the kind of organic matter you need to have the opportunity to build a relationship with someone.
Got it. Should founders take meetings with junior associates at VC firms?
Yes. Yes. The filter should be, is the firm aligned and a good fit for you? And do you think, broadly speaking, they have a thesis or investor or set of investors that make sense? But often I would say more junior members of the team are just as insightful and more dialed in because they spend all their time on the topic and can give you a lot of insight into how the firm is thinking, what they're thinking about, and help you kind of pre-qualify that relationship.
Yeah. And when you work with founders in today's market here in 2026, how many VCs do you tell them they should reach out to in their first wave of outreach?
I think it's really contextual. I think it's contextual on how broad or niche the space is. But oftentimes, I would say it's important to build optionality into the process. You'll learn through the process. I think fundraising is fun because you get great conversations with thoughtful, really smart folks that'll help give you feedback on your business. And hopefully you take something out of every conversation to make you a better entrepreneur and to make your business better, big or small. And so I actually think having these multiple waves can be helpful because it allows you to collect data and then kind of think about where your pitch is resonating, where you want to strengthen it up.
Last lightning question: is fundraising a skill or a talent? And can anyone learn to be good at it?
I think fundraising is a bundle of skills. Talent is a baseline that folks start from. Some skills are very easy for certain people and hard for others, or vice versa, but certainly things you can hone, learn from. But I will say it's unnatural in the sense that there's no training for it. I used to say it's an intricate dance and no one tells you the steps. So I greatly appreciate to you for giving the entrepreneurial community the steps to the dance.
What's it like when you try to present yourself to an investor? Kevin, could you introduce yourself now the way you would introduce yourself in a meeting like that and kind of let us get to know your background a little bit?
Absolutely. So my name's Kevin, and I'm on a mission to help make homeownership more achievable for the next generation in the US. I think it's a problem folks should care about. It's a problem that's deeply meaningful, both to individuals, to families, our society, and it's become more and more challenged. And so as you see the economics of homeownership being more and more challenging, the complexity of it being more and more challenging, but also the promise of technology and AI to help be that trusted partner and co-pilot in the process. I think there really is hope, and we're building a great solution that is ecosystem friendly, that works with, whether it's real estate agents or lenders, to help them work with their clients and help make homeownership easier, more achievable. And the number one thing when we've interviewed people they want is more confidence that they can afford a home. And we're really, our goal is to build more confidence for more people and keep home ownership as a pillar of the American dream.
How did you get here?
I got into entrepreneurship after being in public service and realizing that technology was going to be the jetpack that really could transform whatever in the world you wanted to transform. So if you wanted to make the world better, technology was going to be an incredible vehicle to do that. And so I really jumped into entrepreneurship from there. And I came at it from that perspective. I'm not a tinker. I unfortunately was not a lemonade stand tycoon when I was 2 years old. I didn't build my first computer when I was 6 months old. I don't have any of those cool stories that lots of folks have. I just have a story of really passionately wanting to make people's lives better and realizing, honestly, somewhat later in life, that the technology is an incredible way to do that. And I've been just privileged to work in an amazing ecosystem doing that for the last 15 or so years.
If we go back to your very first round, what was it?
My very first round, I co-founded a company called HomeZen, which was about kind of helping the for sale by owner community operate in a more tech-enabled way. And that company worked out in that we actually helped people save money and had great outcomes with the folks who used it, but we didn't find channel market fit or distribution fit, return capital to investors, moved on, realized it wasn't going to be kind of the great entrepreneurial success story. But we raised, $1 million, which back in 2015 or so was actual money. That's where I got my feet wet, made a lot of my early mistakes, kind of understood, learned a lot. And then, the next company, Caribou, worked out pretty well. And in 5.5 years, built a unicorn, raised on average inside of every 12 months. And so really a rapid education cycle from C to A to A1 to B to C, all the way through, raised just under $200 million. And now with Further, my new AI startup, we raised an inception round from a lot of the same investors from the last company, which worked out, and raised that out of the gate, and have been building for the last 2 years on that.
Amazing. So let's talk about the skills. I asked, is fundraising something that anyone can learn? And what you said was nobody teaches it. I'm wondering, how did you get to learn to do that intricate dance that you talked about where no one tells you the steps?
The analogy probably continues, which is, I haven't taken a lot of data classes, but if you do, I imagine you get out there and you learn by doing, right? You do more of what works and less of what doesn't, kind of like entrepreneurs do every day. You're often in the world of trying to figure out stuff you don't know, and that's kind of the fun of it. And so you get feedback and you learn what gets good responses, bad responses, and you kind of move through it. I will say one of the most important skills is learning how to learn, that metacognition of being perceptive, understanding kind of what's resonating, and asking the right questions, right? One of the obvious lessons people say is often entrepreneurs, especially if you're insecure, you're trying to get up there and pretend you know the answer to everything. And it's much better to say when you don't know something. Just being much more transparent in your thinking, certainly with investors, helps them build confidence that you're thoughtful, you know what you're talking about, you're open with them, and they're getting kind of the full story. And we think about trust and how that gets built, and trust and confidence signals. There are lots of ways to build and use that.
And you mentioned the idea of a trust dividend. I'm curious, why do you call it a trust dividend, and what's your philosophy about that?
And so dividends are often quite small, right? We think about dividends in stocks, but they compound over time, and at scale, they're pretty valuable. And so the idea is that almost no matter how small, whether it's showing up on time, whether it's doing something you say you're going to do it, I think consciously or subconsciously, someone starts to build confidence in you, especially when you're starting at a baseline of zero where you don't know someone, right? And so every interaction is an opportunity to build trust. And it may seem silly or overly analytical, but I do think when you think about, oftentimes you don't have that much time with investors, right? When you're getting to know them and they're getting to know your business, they're busy, you're busy, right? But between the digital interactions, the virtual interactions, the in-person interactions, there are actually lots of touch points and opportunities to build trust. And as you start to string those together, I think that can really help you understand who is going to be the right fit for you in your company, who might not be the right fit for you in your company, because it goes both ways. It's you building trust in them and them building trust in you as well.
I think you're also saying it takes some courage, right? It takes some courage to say things that might be uncomfortable to say. Let's dive in. Talk about one of the times where you've had to do that, where you've had to kind of say something that you may not want to, or share more transparently, and it did build trust.
So to give you two very different examples, I pitched a high-profile name brand GP. We had a couple conversations in. We went to dinner and did some conversation on the business over dinner out in the valley. This is years ago. And it didn't move on past that. When I got some back channel through another investor, the feedback was, I thought if I insulted him, I really wanted him to punch me in the face, and I didn't think he'd punch me in the face. That was the feedback. So that's not a trust dividend conversation. That's a Fight Club conversation. The trust dividend investor and the Fight Club investor are very different investors, and the founders are very different founders. It's neither bad or good, but it's about this matching. You've got to find the right dance partner, whether that dance partner is a Fight Club dance partner or otherwise, right? Early in my founding career, it made no sense to me. It had nothing to do with the quality of my business. It had all to do with that person not being the right fit for me. And in the fullness of time, I understood, well, thankfully, I didn't end up with that person on my cap table, because that would have been a long-term Fight Club relationship I didn't really want. And again, neither bad nor good. There are great founders, great investors who have that orientation. For me, what did work, and I'll tell an anecdote about Ryan Moore, an accomplice, who's a great early investor and friend. And so we were raising our seed round. We had a term sheet, and Ryan came and said, hey, that term sheet, I'm happy to beat that term sheet. I'm happy to write you, a check. And there was room in the route. He didn't have to. But he's like, I can give you a better term sheet. And he basically said, well, look, I need to put this dollars to work and I need this ownership. You can do the math on what I'm willing to pay. And so that was just a vulnerability. He could have tried to jam me. He could have said, sure, I'm going to get the cheapest possible deal. But instead, he actually took the long view, right? This idea of almost enlightened self-interest of, hey, why don't I build trust? You'll understand how I work. People talk about proverbially opening the kimono or understanding being transparent. And there is vulnerability in that, right? But I think it did a lot to build trust. And 30 minutes into the first conversation, he said, I'm in. Now, of course, it was a little more complicated. We had some other meetings. I had to validate some things for him. But what he was telling me when he said, I'm in 30 minutes was, I believe in you. I believe in what you're doing. Let's do this together. And sure, we have to validate some things, but let's go. And it felt like a true partnership being formed as opposed to a beat your brains out transaction, right? And being a great partner over many years throughout the company, a great partner, again, not just in the capital standpoint, a great partner on the board, a great partner when things got tough, a great advisor. The question is, how do you know in the first 30 minutes or 2 hours whether someone's going to be a great 10-year partner? It's that type of decision you're thinking about. And that's where the micro interactions and the kind of trust dividend really does matter, right? It pays out over time. But how do you get that early signal? It's really, really important.
Do you do homework before you meet with people, before you decide whether to meet with people?
This is where, fundraising is so much about discovery and not persuasion. People generally will believe what they already believe. So you're probably not to convince someone that the sky's green and not blue. You've got to find the right people who believe the sky is the same color you do. So that when you enter the conversation, it feels like it's in their kind of sweet spot, right stage, right type of company, right secular trends. We believe the same stuff. All right, I'm already leaning in, right? And I honestly think it's not that you can never convert a skeptic into a believer. It's just very unlikely. And when you think about your allocation of time, you do everything you can to pre-qualify and give yourself the best chance of finding the folks that are likely to be kind of the true believers in the company you're building and in you.
Yeah. If you were coaching a founder, how do they read that in the first meeting? What do you coach them to do?
I think curiosity is really important to look for. Are they curious about your business, right? Do they want to know more? And ultimately, are they spending time? The same micro trust building, when you email them, do they email you back? Do they respond, right? Just saying nothing is the same thing as saying no.
Should they be pitching and going through the script, or are there questions they should be asking along the way that help them read the room?
A question is recommended to me at the end of the conversation, given everything you know, how likely do you think this is to work out? And I think you get pretty honest answers, and you often you can get the leaning in, like, yeah, I think this could be really great. Obviously, things to validate, et cetera. Or there's some things I'm not sure about. I'd have to get much smarter. I don't know much about the space, right? Whenever you get those kind of hedging, then like the reality is it's probably not a wise investment of time for either party to try and, climb the mountain to get there. One thing that had shift for me, candidly, I was very insecure early in my career. And so it was all about how do I just like rapid fire as much about the company, tell them all the great things as quickly as possible and talk. And the reality is you want a balance. And so you want to learn from them as well. These are smart folks who get lots of pitches all the time. So how do you think about these businesses? How do you think about how we're approaching the market? Would you approach it differently? Like, who have you seen, right? And often investors will say, how can I be helpful right at the end? And sometimes that's genuine, sometimes not, hard to tell. But I will say, one of my great stories is a partner at Google Ventures, who I'm a big fan of personally, never quite got there on Caribou timing. Things just didn't align, but generally we appreciated what the other was doing and we're fans. And he said, well, how can I help? And I was like, I could really use an advisor for our engineering organization. I'm not technical. And he said, I've got someone for you. And he came back and he introduced me to a VP of engineering at LinkedIn, who is now a very good personal friend of mine, but also is incredibly helpful to the company. And that was someone who, again, actively took steps to help us aside from the investment. And that is part of, your job as a founder, beg, borrow, and steal. How do you get the resources you need, find the talent you need, whatever. And so there's no harm in making the ask in a very reasonable way of, hey, here's an advisor I'm looking for, here's a hire, but having a very concrete, specific ask, because oftentimes in the background, VCs are making these types of connections all the time. And it's certainly worth asking because sometimes you can get just a huge benefit from it.
You're actually making them perform, and you talked about, are they replying to emails and stuff, but that's going above and beyond. You're kind of testing that performance. What got you to be willing to make those asks instead of assuming that you're there to pitch and show everything is okay?
So one of the things that you ideally want to have is a mastery over reality. And then mastery over reality also means understanding and mapping the things you don't know, not pretending you don't know, understanding you don't know. And then it's how do I actually fill in those gaps as quickly as possible? And if I can leverage that VC I'm meeting with as an asset to help me solve a problem or to fill in a gap, that actually is not a position of weakness. It's a position of strength operationally and mastery and understanding. So I found Ryan because I got fairly far with a partner in his fund. Not Ryan, didn't know Ryan. And I reached back out to him on a different subject, this new company. And he said, actually, this isn't my fit, but let me actually ask around the firm to see if anyone would be interested. And Ryan, one of the co-founders of the firm, reached back out to me. It was interested. So I actually went to a previous partner I knew and had built a relationship, even though he didn't invest. Wasn't a fit for him. He went to a different partner. They spoke. That partner reached back out to me, and that became an incredible partnership over, years and years in my last company. So it's hard to tell. Things don't move in a straight line.
You're developing that relationship by building trust, by being authentic, by being vulnerable along the way. But then you're back to your point of the dividend. It sounds like you're then being able to make withdrawals from that relationship or get appreciation on it over time really well. That's not what everybody does. There's something contrarian in that.
Again, an investor will ask these questions. They're going to ask you or someone else. You want them to ask you and you want to give an answer that's credible. An investor is going to wonder, what are the risks to your business? If it fails, why will it fail? The answer is, if there are no risks, I have no competitors, everything's great. It's actually, yeah, here are the risks. Here are the things. Like either, hey, we've got channel concentration, or actually CAC is higher than we want it to be, or like XYZ, whatever it might be. But saying, yeah, here are the risks and here's how we're going to mitigate them and here's our strategy around them, right? And being open and vulnerable about the reality, because ultimately they are going to figure it out, right? The thing about the investors seeing hundreds, if not thousands of pitches a year is they develop this incredibly dialed in sense for smelling BS, for pattern recognition, for all of it. So you're not going to effectively, out clever an investor. It's not a path to victory. And so I think the answer is really to be authentic. It's okay to be optimistic and authentic. It's okay to lean into how you're going to solve the problem. But the answer is never to not acknowledge the problem. And I also think when you do that, and when they invest anyway, because this is what happened to me, and then if that problem circles back later and you have to solve it, they will recognize, as happened to me, that you were very open on day one about this challenge. So they came in eyes wide open about it. It also allows them to help you. If you don't tell them the problem, they can't help.
What would you say was one of your hardest rounds where you had that kind of adversity and it was the most challenging to really fully show up?
I think the earliest rounds of what was Motor Refi and became Caribou were the hardest. And I think it's because as you get later stage, the data tells the story. You have history, you understand the projections, you extrapolate out, et cetera. The early fundraising, you have very little data. It's all story. And so then the variability of how that story is like interpreted, received, et cetera, there's just a lot of amplitude to that or range of what could happen. And we weren't in a favored hot category, right? Auto refinance was not a thing, that was particularly popular, attractive. It wasn't on trend. People were writing blog posts about it, et cetera. When you think about this trust, dividend, and deficit, we went into every meeting having to convince people that this was a really exciting space when they weren't already believing that. So there has to be the ability to be really excited, right? Like if it works, it's going to be massive. You have to be able to tell that story. It's really important. So I still lead with the positive story, but I also think it's important to know what are going to be the flags and risks that they perceive and how can you address them up front and early. Because again, they're going to ask the questions. You would rather tell them how you're going to solve a problem than have them try to piece it together without you in the room.
Yeah. I always liken it to kind of giving the bull case, that you're there to advocate for, hey, here's why this is valuable. I can't guarantee you 100% odds of success, but I can show you where we're headed and why I think that there's a good reason to bet on this. Let me tell you what that bull case looks like. And of course, you're a skeptic. You should be asking hard questions, right?
Absolutely, right? Going into a raise, I think there's a whole pre-fundraising process that is critical. Getting to clarity on your business, clarity on the questions and challenges, knowing what's going to come up. So you think about the trust dividend. Trust is competence, and competence is trust, right? So I think having done the work ahead of the raise is really important. It's almost a sign of respect. If you're going to take someone's time and you're going to take, they're so busy and you're going to show up, you have to be 100% buttoned up for that meeting. You have to have prepared.
At the moment, there's a question that VCs ask that's going around, which is, well, why wouldn't OpenAI and Anthropic just do this themselves? And in some ways, it's an impossible question. They have enough money, for God's sakes, to do anything they want. So how would you answer those kinds of questions?
It's one of those probabilistic questions where it's not a yes or a no. It's here's how we think about that, right? Here's how we've modeled out the ecosystem. And here's, for example, where I think they're going to go. For example, I think for us that we are building a verticalized app layer, not a horizontal app layer. And that verticalized app layer and last mile, both in workflow specificity, regulatory, and also UX, is actually really valuable and specific. And so I think it's actually a much safer harbor than a lot of these horizontal app layers, right? So that is a thesis and perspective we have about our own business. People can think it's right or wrong, but then you have a conversation to have. So cool. How do you think about it? Do you think that's right or that's wrong? What am I not articulating or what am I missing? But it's the opportunity to help you refine a thesis.
Yeah, leaning into that question, it's really interesting because I've had a lot of entrepreneurs who try to convince the investor they're wrong. And I think what you're saying instead is to say, here's how we think about it. Here's all the things that go into building it. Let's kind of work through that together.
Much more thoughtful to be, hey, here's how we think about it. It's all probabilistic. Here's our thesis. Here's where we're evolving. Here's how we get that. How quickly can we get the other person in this room from the opposite side of the table to the same side of the table? How do we solve the problem together? Now, that doesn't mean I don't have an answer, solve it for me. It means, hey, I think I'm 80, 90% there. Do you think that's right? And actually, you walk out of that meeting with better answers, better thinking about your business, having had a thought partner who's probably more likely to invest in you. But even if not, you actually got something out of the meeting, right? So I think one orientation is, how do I play a game where even if I lose, I win? And it's that if you can actually get something out of that investor interaction, regardless of whether they give you dollars, you've got something else out, an introduction to a BD partner, a future employee, a better perspective on your business that can help you re-underwrite or refine how you're thinking, then that's progress.
I think one of the other benefits of what you're talking about is when you walk in with that attitude, that what you're looking for is what can I get out of it? It's actually something that can be pretty motivating too. Instead of feeling like I'm exposed and on display as a piece of meat, it's instead, hey, what do I get out of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you walk in with a sense of efficacy, with a sense of empowerment into a meeting. That's not, I'm here and you're going to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down, right? It's just a different psychology to your point.
Yeah. So for your current company, for Further, you're helping make homeownership more achievable for the next generation in the United States. What was it like to go in and raise money for Further?
Almost every dollar of that initial round came from investors in my last company. And we had an operating history. They've seen you operate for years, right? So one example of this, I give very detailed investor updates. Some entrepreneurs give almost no information. They just think, I don't want to give any information. I give very detailed investor updates. And I'm shocked still that I have investors from my last company that comment about how much they love the investor updates. And that this just that openness, that transparency, that operating, it's like, I'm not going to try and hide. I can't hide anything from you, but I'm also not going to try, right? We're just going to talk about the business, how it operates, near the updates. And again, that trust dividend pays off when, hey, I'm going to build the next company and you get the benefit of the doubt. It's hard to do. If you did it before, you're more likely to be able to do it again. Now, past performance is not a guarantee of future success, as everyone knows, but they believed in that. They appreciated my approach. They liked it. And they thought, look, if I'm going to bet on anyone, Kevin's made one before.
Underwriting is all about risk. And what you're saying is they had data to calibrate the risk, and the data was on you. How much product did you even have ready at the time you raised money?
Nothing. We hadn't written a line of code.
Not a line of code. Amazing. And did you have confidence going in to do that?
The fun thing about playing in as a serial entrepreneur is after every one, you're just like, I know so much more. I know infinitely more than last time. You learn so much. And so I just thought going to the next one that I felt so confident that this was a problem. It was a problem I was passionate about. This problem technology could help solve. The first time, what they often say is you have this ignorance is bliss where you don't even know how hard it's going to be. So like you kind of just jump right in. Well, doing it the second or third time, you actually know how hard it is. You actually tried, right? And so then you have to be able to, for yourself, underwrite. It's so hard that I'm doing it again anyway, but it's actually easier the last time. if I was able to do it the last time, this time I know so much more.
What do you do differently in fundraising now than when you started? It's been a journey for you.
I try to make it a much lower stakes conversation and lower stakes feeling conversation. Initially, I went in with everyone being like, all right, this is a Super Bowl. This is it, right? I'm here. I've got the meeting, a lot of work went into the meeting. I had this investor. If they invest, then I have the fuel I need to build the rocket ship I want. It's just like, you just escalate the pressure. And the way I think about it now is much more de-escalated. I have the privilege in some ways to think that way, but to say, I'm going to go have a conversation with a really smart person today. And I'm really excited to tell them about my business. I'm really excited to get their feedback and just have that conversation. And if I do a good job telling them about the business and I get their feedback on the business and they like the business and they like me, then we can talk about what, like, doing a deal together might look like. But the first conversation is just about me. My goal is to do what's in my control, which is tell a great story about my business, get their feedback, react to their feedback in a reasonable way, learn, and then based on that conversation, I'll have a lot more signal on whether we should be spending more time together or less time together.
Kind of also in the scheme of building trust, you have a question you like to ask when you get to know people around what are the hard things that they've worked through?
I ask folks often, what's the hardest thing you've ever done personally or professionally? They take about a half a second to decide whether they trust you, because if they trust you, they always tell you a personal story, because the hardest thing people have ever done is always personal. And then often you just get these incredible stories from people, really amazing stories. I mean, people are amazing. If they're honest and tell me the full story, I actually reciprocate with mine. And then it is both a qualifying question and a trust building question, because at the end of that conversation, you are both so much more closely connected together because you've told each other something deeply personal. And as a result, they know you better and you know them better. And I think the authentic thing you're trying to get at is startups are incredibly hard and you need people who are good at hard things. And people who are good at hard things are often people who have done hard things. And so the question kind of is, have you done hard things? And how do you reflect on the thing that happened to you or you did? And the agency narrative is critical. It's not a thing happened to me. It's this happened and here's what I did about it. And here's what I learned, right? And those are the people that you want in your community, right? On your team to do the hard things that you're going to do.
Yeah. So Kevin, I've got to ask you, when you look back, what's the hardest thing that you've been through that's made you a better founder in particular?
Yeah, never ask question. I won't answer. My dad died when I was a kid, died of cancer. I was the oldest of two younger brothers, and he was an entrepreneur, ran a business, and my mom took it over when he died and did an amazing job with it. And people talk about their darkest days, but you know what dark days look like when that has happened. When something incredibly existentially hard has happened, like you understand what that looks like. And the confidence I got from being able to navigate through that, of being able to understand things that are existentially hard, that are unknowable, and recreate mental models, rebuild your view of the world and society and your family and everything else. It's the worst thing that ever happened. But the silver lining is incredibly empowering. If people talk about anti-fragility and shocks making the system stronger, and that's what happened to me. And one thing you find with founders is that's not an uncommon story. Often there was an incredibly traumatic event in their life that like kind of unlocked this superpower or ability to do things in a different way. And, I would never wish for it to happen, but I appreciate that it happened and what it did for me. And so I think there are these kind of hacks or cheat codes, which are, often the same capabilities or skills that make you good at one thing, make you good at another thing. So often you can ask about things indirectly and get a pretty deep and profound understanding of who someone is. And in some ways, that's your job, whether you're trying to understand who your partners are going to be in the business or on the cap table. I'll circle back to Accomplice and Ryan Moore. There was one point in the conversation several years later, he referenced something about my dad that I had never told him. And what I realized is, at that moment, I realized actually investors do pretty deep background research into you and your family. And so Ryan knew all about my dad being an entrepreneur. I had never told him anything about it, right? And so you just realize everyone's trying to get signal.
Yeah, amazing. That's really meaningful. But also, just I notice as you share it, what a tremendous sense of trust that develops, just as you share the experience that you went through. and how high those stakes are, the existential stakes that you faced. And so I'm really grateful for that. The first thing you said when you were kind of introducing yourself is you're a mission driven founder. Do you think that sense of mission driven and kind of those existential stakes shows up for you as a founder and how you lead and where you're building your company?
Absolutely. One of the lessons from losing my father when I was 14 is you just never know how much time you have. That's a lesson you learn very young when that happens. So if you only have so much time and you don't know when that clock runs out, gee, you really should be spending that time on things that you think matter.
I love it. I appreciate that so deeply. And I think you've been an incredible exemplar for it. I think the things you've talked about around authenticity and vulnerability are so deeply woven into that. If you bring that together into any kind of like a golden rule for founders, what's the one gift that if you could give a founder, what might that be?
While it sounds probably a bit like a platitude or Pollyannish, it really all comes down to being the best version of yourself you can be. That doesn't mean don't push yourself hard. I mean, be the absolute best version of yourself. Not 98%, not 99%, be 100% of the best version of yourself you can be. Push yourself as hard as possible to do that. I think you're on the right track.
Kevin, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. So I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
The idea of a trust dividend is something that I just keep coming back to. It's simple in concept, but it takes real vulnerability. You got to show up as yourself, acknowledge the hard things, and keep investing in relationships before you need anything from them. Kevin didn't just talk about that philosophy, he really demonstrated it right here in this conversation. And his parting advice to be 100% the best version of yourself, it may sound like a platitude until you hear what's behind it, but for Kevin, it came from losing his father at 14. That kind of stakes puts everything else in perspective, and it reveals why he is so mission driven in everything he does. I hope this was inspiring to you. If this episode resonated, I'd love to hear which part hit the hardest. So drop a comment or reach out on LinkedIn or find us on Substack where I post behind the scenes reflections from every conversation. We'll see you next time on Razor's Edge.